Hello, everyone. I'm going to be honest with you. First of all, I'm quite close to burnout, and I genuinely mean this. It's been very interesting. I've been touring this book and the ideas of this book. This is the 80th gig, or the 81st gig in the last 40 days. And it's been really interesting to see that a lot of the issues that I used to have and have now sorted out have started to come back. So I just want to put that out there first of all, because something I'm going to talk to you about later on is confident vulnerability. But before that, I thought I'd want to start with an autistic hero. Because one of my heroes is Greta Thunberg, or Greta Thunberg. I think it's actually correctly pronounced Greta Thunberg. But if you say Greta Thunberg, people say, do you mean Greta Thunberg? And it goes on for a long time, that. So it's an interesting thing with neurodivergence. You will very often find that there's a lot of activists who are neurodivergent. Partly that is down to, there's a kind of almost innate inability to accept injustice. And we see that in ADHD and autism. And I was with Chris Packham about a couple of weeks ago outside Parliament, and we were chatting about activism, and there was a lovely moment. I said to Chris, you know, you're quite late diagnosed autistic. When you look back, what are the kind of moments that people say, you see, Chris, that was a sign? And he said, well, a lot of people say that, because when I went to university, I decided to have no friends because I thought they would get in the way of me getting a degree. And I wanted a degree. I said, so, you know, did you have any kind of, social life? He said, oh, yeah, I used to have conversations with people. I said, what kind of conversations did you have? And he said, things like, get out of the way, I want to go into that lecture. So Chris is great, and then Greta, as we've seen in the last few weeks, again, a lot of the kind of ignorant, childish and lazy people in the press have been attacking her. And I think the way that she stands up, and I know Laura Bates is here, who is another person who I count as a great hero. She's here shortly. And one of my favourite things that Greta Thunberg does is very often, because she's young and because she's autistic, you'll get a certain kind of man, a certain kind of Lawrence Fox-ish kind of man, who will go, ha-ha, I'm going to wind up Greta Thunberg. Yeah, I'm going to wind her up. Ha-ha, that'll be really easy because she's young and autistic. And then about 5 minutes later, the men come back out and go, it's really unfair. She was really rude to me. And so this is about the monetised misogynist Andrew Tate, who again thought, I'm going to wind up Greta Thunberg, and didn't do very well. He sent her a tweet saying, I've got 33 cars, and I'm going to send you pictures of all my cars that use petrol. And she emailed back very simply, yes, please do enlighten me. Email me at smalldickenergy@getalife.com. And despite being an alpha male, he didn't take it well at all. And in fact, he put up loads of pictures of himself, all cross online, which gave away his location and thus the arrest. And I think that's a powerful punchline by Greta Thunberg there. So this is just a short poem about Greta Thunberg. There are a few things I like more than seeing Greta get the better of yet another pompous predator. With this new fail, the alpha male slides down the Greek alphabet like a mole rat on a helter-skelter, bumping his head on Kappa and falling ever deeper into the crapper. Another autistic hero shows up another macho zero. So, and thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You are a comrade and an ally. So I'm going to talk about some serious things as well, because I'll give you a little bit of the background. So at the moment, there's a very negative press towards a lot of the neurodivergent stuff in the actual mainstream press. And I think it's because the press generally they're never keen on anything that's kind of progressive or requires them to in any way change their opinions. And there's also, there's a book that's come out that made me very cross, which is called The Age of Diagnosis, because one of the common stories at the moment is, well, I think too many people are being diagnosed. And what that is really saying is the system isn't fit for purpose, so let's blame those who need to use it. And I had a woman came up to me, a woman in her early 40s, about 5 days ago, and it's taken her over 20 years on the journey to be diagnosed with autism. And finally, she found out, and finally she started to feel that weight lifting. And then this book is getting a huge amount of publicity from the BBC and The Guardian, and immediately she's feeling like an imposter again, and she came up to me in tears. And this is one of the things, and I find this a lot. I mean, there isn't time to probably deal with it today, but I highly recommend Gina Rippon's book, The Lost Girls of Autism, because there are so many women who've been entirely ignored for so many years in terms of neurodivergence, who are now finding out that they are autistic, sometimes women in their 70s, in their 80s. And whenever I meet them, I kind of know what they're going to tell me, because as they walk up to me, I think, you're in new skin. You're walking in a skin that now fits you, and you know why all of these things that you used to count as your weaknesses and your failures were just because you had a different set of skills. I'll also quickly mention that very often we see words like disorder used, and really it is difference. That's what it is, that you have a different set of skills, you have a different way that your mind works. So yes, this Age of Diagnosis book, at one point in the Age of Diagnosis, the author says, anecdotally, I worry that the majority of people diagnosed with ADHD see no palpable improvement in their life. And then in the next sentence says, though many of them say they're much happier. Now, I don't know how you measure your palpable improvements in life, but I see happiness as being one of the major palpable improvements. And I spoke to hundreds of people, and no one that I met, and I'm sure there may be cases, by the way, but of the hundreds of people that I met and spoke to, autistic, dyspraxic, dyslexic, ADHD, no one regretted finding out about how their mind was working. Because again, one of the things you'll hear thrown around is people will say things like, they go, but why do you want a label? And the thing is, it's not a label. It might be a label to other people, but people don't wait 4 and 5 years and longer to get a label. Oh, now I've got the label, thanks, bye. They're waiting for a route map, for a user's manual. And when you get that I cannot tell you the difference in my internal life now to my internal life 4 years ago. And I didn't go looking for a diagnosis. I mean, it's one of those, an interesting thing is it's very hard to diagnose yourself. I'd been diagnosed by audiences for 25 years, right? I had so many people who come up to me and going, oh, I'm autistic, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, and all people just saying, oh my God, we had to make a list again. Here are the 29 stories you began and did not finish. Please finish at least 5 of them before we leave, so we have a sense of closure before we return to Milton Keynes, and all of these things. In fact, a friend of mine, Ruth, recently sent a message to me, and she said, I feel really bad because I thought you must know, and I couldn't believe that you didn't know because it was so clear. And, this is I was reading a book by Sarah Hendricks. Sarah Hendricks is someone who's done a lot of studies into autism, had written, I think, 3 books at the time of this story on autism, and been involved in scientific papers on autism. And then she decided her next piece of work, she was going to write about what it was like for her as a neurotypical woman to live with an autistic husband. Some of you will have guessed the twist in this particular story. She announced that, and immediately her friends and colleagues went, oh my God, Sarah, we didn't know you didn't know. You're not neurotypical. We thought you wrote so well about autism and she went, how did I not know? I had all of this knowledge, but I couldn't turn that prism back on myself. So for me, I found out basically, I was very lucky. What was it now? Probably about 8 years ago, I wrote a book called I'm a Joke and So Are You. And in that book, I interviewed, amongst a lot of other people, I interviewed about 5 or 6 therapists. And at the end of every interview, the therapist would always say, I presume you're in therapy, Robin? And I'd go, no. And they'd go, oh. And so that led to Josh Cohen, who's a friend of mine. Josh, who's also a therapist, said, I can recommend someone. I think you should go to therapy. So I went to therapy for a short time with a brilliant woman called Juliet. And it didn't get me to where I am now, but it got me to the first part of it, which was that I realized that lots of different things that I thought were all manner of different issues were one issue. They were anxiety. So things like, and this won't be true for everyone, but things like, for me, irritable bowel syndrome, which plagued me and made it a really difficult, I was paranoid and anxious in every journey I took, every play that I went to. Oh my God, have I got an aisle seat? I better have an aisle seat. I'd be thinking about these things. And it turned out, for me, it was anxiety. But it was very real physically. This is one of those things that I think is very important. It's like in studies of pain. If someone says they're in pain, it's not up to you to say, no, you're not. It's up to us to acknowledge that pain and then try and work a route to understand it. You know, there's a great story. Again, I think it was in I'm a Joker, So You. I found this story from the Lancet about a builder who on a construction site had a nail gun and accidentally shot a nail through his foot. And he was in agony, and he was screaming in the hospital, and they were giving him the highest doses of morphine possible, and he still had the boot on because there was a nail all the way through it. And it was only when they did the x-ray they found out the nail hadn't gone through his foot at all. It had passed through his toes without, literally not even breaking the flesh. But his belief in what had happened. And this is part, so that again is why, when we understand the mind, so I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. I normally talk for about 17 hours. I probably will, I'll just stand in Regent's Park, just continuing on and on and on, right? But I was very lucky. What happened was, it was when I was still on Twitter, and I saw there was someone who followed me called Jamie and Lion. Jamie is a young autistic man, Lion is the plushie that goes everywhere with him. I thought this person looks interesting. He did a series of podcasts about autism. I thought I'd be interested to know about that. So I followed him, and within less than a minute, this DM arrived. And it said, this is really surreal. I've been waiting and I was hoping you were going to follow me. There's something I really want to talk to you about. Do you mind if I just blurt it out? I said, please, just blurt it out. And he then, over a couple of paragraphs, talked about the fact that I've been watching your work. I've been watching the way that you present things. I've been watching the way that you perform. I've been watching the way that your social media kind of runs. I'd really like to talk about the neurodivergent model with you. And so I sat down then, and we had a Zoom meeting for 4 hours, a couple of days later. And at the end of it, he said, every single thing you've said there is an ADHD answer. And some of them are quite interestingly banal. One of them was, you might know about this, do you leave cupboard doors open? And I said, I don't believe I do, but my wife would disagree with that. He said, huge tick. And the reason for that, and this is also why you'll very often find amongst particularly ADHD people, the reason you have to keep going to check whether you've locked the door is your mind is racing all of the time. So when you go to, because I think a lot of people, their partner thinks, God, they're just lazy and they don't care and they expect me to close the door. But it really is, you open the door, you take the coffee out, you go to close the door, and as you go to close the door, you remember an article that you read in 1983 when you were a teenager in Unexplained magazine. And it was all about a vole that had been found in Guernsey that could apparently speak fluent French. And suddenly that's all you can see, a vole on the Channel Islands singing Frère Jacques. So the door no longer exists. Now that's one of the more what seems to be banal ones, but that's what's going on, this racing mind. So for me, and I'm going to be very open about some of these things, one of the things was I had a lot of suicide ideation. So I would, and this would partly be down to something which is basically, it's rejection dysphoria. It's this sense that when, a sense of failure from sometimes tiny things. You will have a moment where you hear, like, again, here, I'll give you a banal version of being able to hear failure or disappointment in people's voices or words. So I was going to do a gig in Hull. The gig started at 8 o'clock. I told the guy who ran the venue I'd be there at 6:30, but I'd had to go and get some food. So I thought, I won't actually be there till 6:45. I'll text him. So I texted him, I won't be there at 6:30. Sorry, I'll be there at 6:45. And he just sent back 2 letters, which were okay. But I didn't hear okay. I heard, oh, God, okay, well, that's going to be really difficult now, and that's let me down, and you said 6:30, and you're not here at 6:30, and then sometimes it can be much bigger than that. It can literally just be the turn of phrase when someone says, why'd you leave that there? And you don't just hear, why'd you leave that there? You hear, you're a piece of shit, you ruined my life, you're a really terrible human being. You hear it, and it can last months on end. And people will say, why don't you just get over it? Well, yeah, that would be great. I think anyone who's told, well, why don't you just get over it? Like, why don't you just cheer up? Why are you anxious about that? Why are you depressed about that? Wouldn't it be great if we had a mind where the frontal lobes go, yes, do you know what? You really should buck your ideas up. But that's not how it's like with anxiety. Anxiety, I'm sure all of you may have had moments where you've been anxious about something that your logical and reasoned mind says there's no reason to be anxious about this. But the problem is a lot of our mind evolved before language existed. So when you go to speak where anxiety starts from, your frontal frontal lobes go, come on, let's deal with that situation now. You go to speak to anxiety, and anxiety can't understand a word. You go, anxiety, just so you know, we don't need to be worried about this at all. And anxiety just goes, and you go, oh, anxiety doesn't seem to do English at all, right? So all of these things, and they do, that's why people go, isn't everyone a bit like that? Isn't everyone a bit worried? Isn't everyone a bit depressed? But that's the thing, it's not when it's a bit, it's when it's everything. It's when the fog around you, it's like I've done the show Infinite Monkey Cage. We recorded the 207th episode last Tuesday, right? So we've done that many episodes. And if you listen to me on the radio for the first, I would say 160 episodes maybe, you would probably hear someone who appeared to be confident, who was able to talk to Nobel Prize winners, who was able to go off on tangents and make lots of jokes up and just improvise strange routines about quantum indeterminacy. But in my head, for the whole of each one of those recordings, was a little heckling goblin that would go, that wasn't good enough, that was disappointing, I don't think anyone wants to hear you on this show, you got in the way of what Brian Cox just said, that's really bad, I think that man in the front row looks angry. And very often, I would start writing little like emails to, in fact I did, on a few occasions I resigned from the show. I said I don't think I'm doing a good enough job, I think I'm letting everyone down. And that was even the fact that we were winning prizes. It didn't matter. And so when people say everyone's a bit like this, and also there's another huge problem we have, which is a lot of, again, this very conservative media. And I mean that with a small c and a big C, but it's very conservative. You know, we've seen this over, you know, some of the stuff that, well, much of the stuff that has been printed about the trans community and much of the really vicious dehumanizing that goes on there. Again, I think there are people who fear spectrums of any kind whatsoever. There are people who want a monochrome world. They want black and they want white, and they don't want all of the possibilities that come from all of these different things that we can be. But the thing is that if you can survive, if you can mask yourself, then they don't want to know. Are you functioning in the way that we need you to function for society? Have you done the jobs we need you to do? If you have, shut up. And people will say, but you're getting on okay, aren't you? Because, of course, we don't... I remember when Philippa Perry said to me once, she said, the problem with being human is that we judge everyone else from their exterior and we judge ourselves from the interior. So very often there's a shortfall. I mean, I think with now seeing so many more women finding out about their neurodivergency, and one of this as well, like with ADHD, ADHD was often seen as it's the child that's jumping up and down on the desks and screaming and whistling. But actually, it's also the child that's sitting really still and looking like they're really concentrating, and they're vibrating from anxiety so fast that actually they're still, but they're picking away at the threads there on their jumper. And they are sometimes, you know, there's that little nervous tick that they're kind of trying to hide. All of those different things, which is, if it doesn't show, then we can ignore it. You know, some of the rules of school, like that thing where people say, look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you. Why? Because sometimes, and I'm sure you look someone in the eyes and you're really concentrating on looking them in the eyes. You're concentrating so hard to remember to look them in the eyes. You're not hearing a word they're saying. I'm looking them in the eyes, I'm looking them in the eyes, I'm looking in the eyes, they're saying something, I don't know what it is. I'm looking them in the eyes, they've stopped talking, I wonder what that was about. Looking in the eyes is not... There's a lot of young autistic people I know who, when they go, like if they get to university, they find that in a lecture, they have to do two things at once. Because if you're just doing one thing, just concentrating on the lecture, eventually it just goes, and you just get a kind of grey fuzz and nothing. But some of the people I know will be reading a book at the same time. That's in the same way that some people will be texting or looking at things or doing... Not everyone... At full concentration, their full concentration requires two things, not one. Then you see other things in school, like often if I've got young people in the audience, I'll ask, you know, do you write stories in your English class? And says, yeah. I say, do you have to write a story plan beforehand? They go, yeah. And some of them I say, do you like it? They go, no. I say, well, this is the trick. What you do is you leave one blank page, then you write the story, then you fill in the story plan. And it looks like you've done an amazing job because you've really kept to that plan. But actually, for a lot of people's minds, if you have to plan beforehand, you then don't function very well because you know what's going to happen. For an ADHD mind, it is the fact that you go, I need to not know what's going to happen next. I need to be excited about what is going to go on. You know, and again, fidgeting, all of those things. So anyway, I don't know how long I've got because it's still 5 o'clock according to that clock, and we're actually trapped in a strange, damned eternity, and I am your Dante's circle of hell. But I want to quickly mention trauma because this is a very... Now, I know there's a lot of debates about what causes ADHD, autism, etc. We see autism predominantly as a genetic thing. Oh, God, how long have I got? Oh, okay, that's good. Right. Let's make it 50. So there will be, like someone came up to me recently and went, ADHD is entirely genetic. I know that. There's a man called Russell. He does a lecture on YouTube, and it's entirely genetic, and I'm an ADHD counsellor. And I thought, well, you're the worst person to be a counsellor. Because when we're dealing with the human mind, the idea of 100% certainty, as we know from the history of biology, and actually in some ways I'm not that interested. I am interested, but I'm not as interested in what leads to autism, ADHD. I'm interested in building a world which has a wide enough sky to fit in this incredible diversity of minds. Because I think that's the first issue we need to deal with. And I don't want to see a world without autism, and I don't want to see a world without ADHD, because then we have a world with far fewer art galleries, far fewer observatories, far fewer crazy conversations that actually lead to places of wonder. But trauma does definitely seem to play a part. And I think one of the things, I'll tell you a little bit about what I think might have been mine, is, and also I should say, even though autism is seen, as genetic, also, of course, very often there is trauma with autistic people, because people don't have the tools to realise that, oh man, there's so much to talk about here. I'm sorry, but it's like, I always find that I think I vibrate at roughly the same speed as a 5-year-old or a dog. Whenever I go and stay at friends' houses, they always go, I'm so sorry, my dog doesn't normally behave like that, or I'm so sorry, my 5-year-old doesn't normally behave like that. And I think that's the way I try and talk to everyone as well. I try and talk to her, like I did a thing at the Crick Institute just down the road, and it was on a Tuesday night, and I had 3 Nobel Prize winners in the front row. And the next morning I was playing a primary school, and I had 3 Willy Wonkers in the front row. And I think I spoke to them in a very similar way. And I try and speak to everyone. It's in the way that we patronise the elderly, we patronise children, we add a different tone to our voice. But if you start with just a human voice, and I've found that when I talk to young autistic people, sometimes my friend Kath was saying about someone, a teenager she introduced me, when he normally only talks to people for about 3 minutes, but we found the right way of having a conversation, which is a conversation which is not, to try not to patronise as much as possible. So anyway, going back to the trauma thing, right? So for me, I think I was in a car accident 2 days before my 3rd birthday. So there was a car on the wrong side of the road on a country lane travelling at speed. It crashed into the car my mum was driving. My mum was nearly killed and suffered a lot of things that then continued for the rest of her life. She would have died had it not been for my dad being a few cars behind. And when the ambulance came, he shouted at them and said, I'm telling you now, if you take her to the local hospital, she will die. And later on we found out that was true. She would have died if she'd gone. They wouldn't have had the facilities needed. And in fact, there's a beautiful thing that I think I do mention it in the book. My dad, when he died a few years ago, my sisters and I were going through loads of the things that had been left behind. And we found a letter that was from the ambulance men. And it said, Dear Mr. Ince, thank you so much for this letter. Letters like this are very rare. You are the envy of the ambulance station. And that says so much about my dad, that still at that point my mum was in a coma and possibly dying, and he would have thought, but I must write, because I was quite forthright with the ambulance men, and I must thank them for what they did. And I should also add this, that I think it's incredible that there are so many neurodivergent people in prisons, for instance. There's a friend of mine who's a legal aid lawyer, and he says so many of the people he said they're nice people. I like most of the people I look after, he said, but they have an impulsive thought. And they will go, I'm going to do a burglary now, and they do it so badly. They punch the glass open with their hand, they leave DNA everywhere, and it's that impulse. And this is again why everyone who's kind of going, oh, neuro, it's such a fad, isn't it? Isn't everyone ADHD nowadays? Isn't everyone autistic nowadays? Well, if they are, we need to change the world a lot quicker then. So I know that I'm lucky, because I had someone in my life who was there to really help me and protect me and battle. And also I need to say this about my mum. My mum, Kate, she suffered from depression for the rest of her life. And also this is what I've now realised, because I used to think the main part of the trauma was that I thought it was my fault. Because when you're little, You think you've caused terrible things. I spoke to so many people in the book who felt that they had caused their mum and dad's divorce, or they felt that some of the people I spoke to felt that the reason their mother or their father had died was because of them when they were 5 or 6. The child's mind, for us to understand that more. I spoke to someone the other day whose father killed himself when she was 7, and it was never spoken of. Her father was never spoken of again. The next day, they just went to school, and that was it. And so that kind of trauma, there's a thing called, it's about daffodils, not daffodils, sorry, it's dandelions and orchids. And dandelions and orchids is the fact that some children, a lot of children, apparently are kind of dandelions, which means they can deal with the high winds and, a dog suddenly running through the dandelions. But some children are orchids, and they're capable of great beauty, but they're also a little bit more fragile. And there are certain things that can happen to you that may well damage you a great deal, that other people go, but it didn't damage that person, why did it damage you? And I was talking to a teacher, and she said, of course, the tragedy is that because we have such large class sizes, because we're so underfunded, we have to walk in and we have to presume that all of the children are dandelions. Whereas in a better world, we would walk in and presume that all of them were orchids and then find out in that direction rather than the other direction. So anyway, I used to think that because I'd caused that crash, which of course was nothing to do with me, that was and now I look back and I realize it was something else for all my family, which was the woman who got into the car that night was not the woman who left the hospital 4 months later. My 2 older sisters were hiding in the bushes when my mum returned, terrified. Here was a 31-year-old woman, and the mum they'd seen get in the car, and now there was this tiny, fragile woman. My eldest sister was not even recognised by my mum when she went up to see her. And I realised how much that affects people as well. I realised the fact that when my mum was dying and my dad was talking to her, I saw something. It was the first time, my God, I was in my 40s by then. It was the first time that I realised that she was not the same person for him. And yet he would never have he was told to leave her. He was told, why not put her in a home? And go, oh my God, And in fact, my mum, I would like to say this as well, was an incredibly strong woman. Because at one point in the book I say, and then amazingly, she pulled herself together. And then I make it clear, when I say pulled herself together, I don't mean pull yourself together. I mean an incredible act of strength. She managed to make herself whole again. So many people have this in their... And the thing with trauma is, I think very often we go, my trauma's not enough. Because we know the world is filled with trauma. We look at what is going on in Gaza now, and we feel, well, why I shouldn't complain. But the thing is, to deal with our trauma, first of all, doesn't get in the way of anyone else dealing with their trauma. And this, I think, is the most important thing. That when we are able to deal with our trauma, we can become far better allies for those who can't. When we have managed to become stronger, then we can hold out our hand and our grip is stronger. And I'm just going to tell you one very quick story again on trauma, this is a little poem that I wrote. There's an actor called Colin Jevons, wonderful actor. He was in Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes playing Lestrade. He was in Dennis Potter's Blue Remembered Hills, brilliant actor. And I went to see him recently, and we were chatting. He's 95 years old. And he told me these wonderful stories about working with Ralph Richardson and just lots of beautiful stories about his wife who they'd loved each other so dearly. It was just really, and so many different things. And then he told me this story. He said, when I was 8 years old, I wrote a story at school and I handed it in. And the next day, the teacher brought me to the front of the class, held up my exercise book and went, Colin Jevons, there is no way you could have written this story. You must have copied this out from a book. Because she couldn't believe in his imagination. And as he told me that story, I could see this is 87 years ago, but it was in his eyes. And he said from that point onwards, I knew that I should always be careful with my imagination because imagination gets you into trouble. So this is a poem that I wrote for Colin, and it's also for some other friends of mine. All the stories in this are sadly true. At 95, I can still see in his eyes the teacher that scolded him. The one that wouldn't believe his creativity had not been copied from a storybook. His lesson learned, he never dared allow his imagination to run wild. Only a child, and already others built the wall to keep him in. The bully evades their insecurity by surrounding himself with those weak need, explodes with goading at those more other than the rest. The ruthless jesting, the undermining, travels from the school gates and still gnaws the flesh inside the retirement home. The keenness of the meanness of the French teacher runs through him like hate through a stick of rock. The boys that found their joys by stripping a barely teen down to his skin and dripping hot wax upon him. The girls who made a world that wouldn't let you in, and so you stood alone each break time, waiting for the possibility of a friend, which was always ended by a rumour or a lie. Time passes, but we carry it with us and should feel no shame. Let our stories rise to the surface. Let them breathe the air. Let them start to heal. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're excellent. I love dogs. I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll do one more poem, and then I'll throw it out to questions, which is, I wanted to mention confident vulnerability, because confident vulnerability is a lot of our lives are when you have a vulnerability, and a vulnerability includes talking about what you love. So, you know, when that bit when you hold it and you say, I love this, and then people go, oh, brilliant, we've got something against them now. And there's certain people who can't express love because they remember from the school days that if you express love, people went, we can smash the thing they love. Sometimes it's about your anxiety. Sometimes it might be about your depression. Sometimes it might just be about a specific need, which feels like, for instance, you know, there's a lot of autistic people I know that when they go into a room to work, they bring with them a set of skills that no one else has. But the moment they say, oh, I've just got a bit of a problem with the harshness of the light here, or the background noise, or just the fabric and just the sensitivity, people go, oh my God, they need so many things. And you go, well, if you bring something different into the room, you might have some different requirements as well. So confident vulnerability is that bit where, you know, a lot of people, I think, I won't talk much about this, but, you know, there's friends of mine that I spoke to in this book who, because of their neurodivergence, also ended up in abusive relationships, because when you think you're a piece of shit, it's very easy for other people to manipulate you as well. And so confident vulnerability is where we say, do you know what, I am going to express, like when I arrived here today, because I really was quite fraught when I got here. This weekend and this week's been quite difficult for certain reasons. And so when they said, are you okay? I said, to be honest, I'm not actually. I'm really kind of wound up at the moment, and I'm a little bit on edge, but everything will be fine. Like, yeah, I can go on at 2:15. It's not a problem. But I'm just going to tell you that. I'm not going to say, yeah, I'm okay. I'm just going to tell you I am a little bit fraught at the moment. And then sometimes confident vulnerability is this. Sometimes when I've talked about the car accident, like recently when I was playing Stenning, a church in Stenning on the south coast, and an old couple came up to me and said, do you remember us? We're the Rowlands. And they used to live in the village where I was born and where I was brought up. And I haven't seen them since I was 6. And I said, thank you so much for everything you did, because I know you helped my mum and dad a great deal after the crash. And then I said to them, because I know my mum was changed by the crash. And his face just dropped. And he looked so sad. And he said, yes, she was. And that really hit me. And I was doing a talk the next day, and I started talking about the crash. And suddenly it just rose up in me. I could feel it in my throat that I was about to start crying. And I stopped, and I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I got really a little bit overwhelmed. I'll be all right. Just a moment. And I was worried about the audience, you know, because I'm always worried. I do think about you, more than you might imagine. And then this man at the back just shouted out, you take as long as you need. And I saw him, and I could see that he was going through something. So I just walked to the back of the room, and I hugged him, and then I walked back. And all of these things, all of these confident vulnerabilities, this, I think, is sometimes why the society fears this so much, is that when we can stand up, and when we can express our love for so many different groups and people, and so many people are suffering, then it means we don't allow our governments to commit the terrible acts that they do. And it means we do stand up, and very often it will affect us in work, and it will affect the way, and you may well get a lot of abuse online. You know, Laura, who's coming on later on, I just want to say, I don't know if you know the amount of abuse she's received since she was a young woman, since she stood up, and she has been so compassionate and so interested in finding out, like when she wrote the book, Men Who Hate Women, immediately all these people, not only the amount of abuse she got, but also the number of people who went, oh, what, so she's saying all men hate women? And you go, no. That will be a book called All Men Hate Women. And so to be able to stand up. So in fact, this is a poem that I wrote, and I think it was influenced by Laura, but also someone else very important, an author called Lucia Osborne Crowley, who has written an amazing book called The Lasting Harm about the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and also wrote an incredible book called My Body Keeps Your Secrets. And it's also for my sisters as well. So I'm just going to read this as a kind of segue into when Laura comes on. And this is about the fact that very often men will say, yeah, but not all men. It's not all men. And you kind of go, well, I think we need to work a lot harder before we can just hide behind that hashtag. Not all men, sure, but oh so many men. And as one, negligibly, some very male males may say, I cannot comprehend how so many abuses never end. The man whose legs spring open like misogynistic secateurs as he takes the train seat by your side. Blurs the boundaries, both ambivalent to your existence, yet the knee rub is persistent, checking out the territory. A woman smiling at a stranger shouldn't lead to danger, and yet so often friendliness is deformed into an offer. All that late night threat dismissed as just a joke, and any questions of behaviour as you're too woke. In Washington, a house has opened gates on a relentless predator, while previous presidents were pleased to cajole fellatio and then post-priapism turn their flirtatious face into angry denial. That woman, that woman. A comment on a stranger's breast and all the rest should surely be confined into a past, but still not yet. If we wish to be not all men, if we wish to prove Solanus wrong, then we will show that to be truly strong, a man won't stand in silence while his sisters fight alone. Anyone got any questions?